Hi there, BookTube. My name is Nathan, and this is the Rambling Reviewer, so called because I tend to ramble a lot. Now I have just finished reading a book and I wanted to automatically come and talk about it, so this video might be a little bit rambling. I want to keep it, short though. Maybe around 5 to 8 minutes long. Probably 8, actually, yeah, probably 8 minutes. Probably about around that I hit at. But the book I want to talk about is The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. This is the second book in her Vampire Chronicles series, and it is the first book that I have read by her, Vampire Chronicles or otherwise. I had gotten her book Sleeping Beauty for romance, for Autumn Amour, uh, a an event that was done by the Bookish Bryants that I never really ended up taking part in, um, but I wanted to, and I want to next year. Um, but this is my first Anne Rice novel. Now, the reason I'm reading it is because of, as with many things, because other people who I watch on YouTube are reading it. Um, Steve Donahue and Matthew over at Mayberry Book Club are doing uh, a months-long read-along, well, more of a book club thing, um, of the Vampire Lestat, and they do this every month. I'm sure all of you are aware of this already, but this was their pick for the month, and I'm not part of that group, but I still wanted to read the book, as I have done a few of the other books that they have done in the past that I have not made videos for because I was not currently making a video. I don't want my video to interfere with their videos at all, though, so I am going to be releasing this late. So by the time that I release this, I will have already finished the book about a week in advance. So just for your information. Now, um, again, Vampire Lestat. This is the sequel to The Interview with a Vampire. I have not read that book. I have not seen the movie. Uh, I knew a little bit about it. The character of Lestat. I didn't really even know anything else. I didn't know the setting really. I knew it was like I think I did know that it was like 1800s. Um, but I wasn't aware it was set in New Orleans. I had no idea about any of the other characters aside from Lestat and Lewis. Um, so I went into this completely blind. And part of the reason I was kind of not worried about that is because in his own video, his own announcement video, Steve Donahue said that the book kind of carries itself. I don't remember his exact words. Um, but he is definitely right. Uh, I did not feel lost at all in the book. Um, this is a prequel. It is told, or it's a prequel slash a sequel. The beginning and the very end are told from the perspective of Lestat, who was woken up in the 80s and is now writing his own story to try to bring out his old friends and enemies. He wants to, I guess, create some stir, some war between the vampires and humans or something. It's not really like given much detail what his plans are, and I don't think he really has deep plans. I think he just wants the excitement. Um, but he decides to write a book, which he knows will break the anonymity of the vampires. Uh, that will gain the ire of some of the old vampires who he dealt with, uh, and that will thrust him and his friends into the spotlight. Uh, but most of the book takes place um, during the uh, the late 1700s, early 1800s, early to mid 1800s maybe. And I really enjoyed this. It took me a little bit, maybe about the first 130 or so pages. I wasn't really feeling it. This is starting off in the 80s, which I thought was a little bit cheesy. This book was written in the 80s, but I guess it just felt outdated, I guess. Which feels weird when the rest of the book takes place in the 1800s. And the early life of Lestat, uh, you see him uh, gain a friendship with another young man named Nicholas, and that friendship turns into infatuation and love, and they run away to Paris, and then Lestat is kidnapped by a vampire named Magnus, and he is transformed into a vampire. And even at these early stages of his vampirehood, I guess, um, I didn't love the story. It took me until a particular scene where I really started to get grasped by the storytelling, and that is around the uh, around page 130. Uh, Lestat and Nicholas have um, been acting at a theater, and this is before he was a vampire. Before Lestat was a vampire, and Lestat returns to the theater, and he is putting on a show, and he is doing all these crazy things. He is screaming at uh, uh, an intensity that humans shouldn't be able to scream at. He is moving in weird, inhuman ways. He is jumping to the rafter, and it's terrifying. It's both terrifying and it's so depressing because you see how he is doing is pushing away the people who he loves. And that's what he wants. That he's trying to scare them. He's trying to push them out of his life. Um, and I just at that point I really started to love the storytelling, and from then on out it just got more and more invigorating. The way it played with that those ideas of Lestat as a terrifying creature, as a melancholic creature, and through the ages, his kind of dealings with other vampires, and how all these vampires have this kind of drive to find what motivates them, what gives them meaning. Um, and you think like in just your day-to-day life, maybe you deal with that yourself, but then you think about that where you're faced with that for an eternity, uh, where people you love disappear, where you live life more intensely, where you live life quicker. I mean, you could read a book in like hours, probably faster. I don't know how fast he reads, but there are parts where it describes him reading, and you know he's reading extremely quickly. Um, and I just love that. The the character of Lestat also is extremely interesting. I believe he's been referred to often as like the brat vampire, and I definitely see that, especially again towards the end. Uh, he is um, he is charismatic. He is a very very interesting figure. He is also a character who does what he wants, and oftentimes with no thought to what and how that will affect the people around him. I also really liked the mythology the story brought with it. The the world of the vampires was very interesting. And the different kinds of vampires and the different personalities of the vampires and how they change over time, how they take new systems of thought and use them. Uh, very, very interesting. Probably the two biggest issues I had with it, though, were the philosophy. So I mentioned earlier that I did enjoy the idea of how Lestat is kind of discussing with the other vampires the meaning of life, the meaning of their lives, whether they have meaning at all, good, evil, uh, God, etc. And I do enjoy that theme, but at times it was overdone. At times it was like you would be reading, and you would, and Lestat would just be kind of like almost like preaching to the other vampire, and the other vampire would preach back to him, and it's not so much that I disliked the idea, but I think a lot of that could have just been, you know, maybe minimize that those dialogue sessions. Have more of those difference of views shown, and only have what is needed to be said. Um, it didn't prevent me from enjoying the book though, and I always just wanted to know what was happening next, which was great. The other big problem with this book, uh, and what I imagine might be a big problem with Anne Rice's books in general, is the sexual bits. Not so much the not overdone, but the classic idea of vampirism as innately kind of sexual, going back to just Dracula, where they're kind of a horrific sexuality uh, to the vampire's intimacy with its victims. Um, that's all fine. I get that. Uh, there was some creepy aspects to this one specific though, and that is Lestat's own and the other vampires' attraction to young people, for one thing. Um, the thing with Nicholas isn't a problem because they grew up together, but there are parts where Lestat kind of has a weird attraction to another young-looking vampire who's in fact much older than him, Armand, and the the discussion of Armand and his relationship to his own master is just a little bit strange. Um, it didn't bother me. It didn't like trigger me or anything. It was just weird. And there's also an even weirder aspect in regards to Lestat and his mother. He changes his mother because she is dying, and afterwards he starts to become attracted to his mother, um, who cuts down her hair and he describes as looking like a boy, though very very awkward. And this might possibly be less that Anne Rice has like a young boy slash incest fetish, and more that she perhaps just isn't very good at writing the distinction between familial and platonic intimacy and sexual intimacy. Maybe also there is a difference there, but she makes a decision to not show it. I like all forms of intimacy have some linking together. I'm not sure. It is weird to read though. The other problem I came up with, not really a issue for this book specifically, but just in my own reading of it, was the epilogue. So after the bulk of the book is set during the uh, late 1700s, early 1800s, or maybe mid 1800s, it fast forwards to uh, what occurs, I imagine, during Interview with a Vampire. Uh, and then after that, it takes place in it shows you what happens in the modern era after he releases his book. Um, the the reading of the epilogue in regards to what happens in the Interview with a Vampire is, of course, not extremely um, emotional, not extremely interesting. And that's just because you're not grounded in what happens. Most of the book is set in Europe, and then you have 50 pages that are set in New Orleans or so, or actually I think it's less than 50 pages, like 30 pages, that goes over 60 years or 68 years of his life with Lewis and Claudia, another character who he transforms into a vampire within, I believe, Interview with a Vampire. And I'm sure there was a lot of drama and beauty and sadness and emotion in that book. But reading about the events in such a condensed frame takes away that emotion. So if you are reading this and you have not read Interview with a Vampire, I would almost suggest just skipping that epilogue. Uh, read, or at least skip it until you have read Interview with a Vampire. I think you can read this. This book does not spoil anything for the most part, except for what happens in the epilogue. So I would honestly recommend read the entirety of this, skip the epilogue, read the last. I think there's a different. I think the very end is titled something different. Like I think Dionysus in San Francisco. Yeah, read the entirety of it. Skip the epilogue. Read Dionysus in San Francisco, and then if you haven't already read it, go back and read the Interview with the Vampire, because I did feel like I didn't get the full emotional state, I guess, there. No, I have already talked way too long about this book. I wanted this to be at 8 minutes long, and I am over doubled that. I've over doubled that. Uh, I have gone over. How do you want to say that? Um, I did really enjoy this book though, even with the issues I've mentioned, with the weird sexuality issue, with the weird philosophical issue, and with the epilogue. It really isn't Anne Rice's fault so much as the fact that I am reading the sequel slash prequel to a book before I read the original book. Um, but I definitely want to read more Anne Rice. I want to continue reading this series. Maybe I will read Interview in December, uh, and then read some more of her stuff. Read Queen of the Damned, and so on. So that's all I got on this right now. The Vampire Lestat. See you, BookTube.